So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yes. So in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery is wrong, I think
Now,
it
it
should
says
say
that in the story of Moses.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says
Well,
it's immoral.
that's why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
But why does the Bible predicate and tell people exactly how to take care of a slave? Isn't that
Well,
immoral? Wouldn't you say that culturally we've evolved as a species, as he said earlier about empathy?
Yeah, I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality and the presumption that every person was made in the image of God.
Wouldn't you
And so
say
slavery...
The same group who, led colonization, the Crusades, the people who arguably had one of the biggest movements of slavery in history, they solved it. This is just a dishonest position. It's just a dishonest, and I think they even argue this in later in, but people always will equate that. I was arguing with this one guy, and he was Christianity, and I think it's the same point. Christianity ended slavery in America, and I'm like, not really. I mean, we had a civil war, and the federal government declared it to be illegal in the South, and then that was, there's no court. That's the state. That's not Christianity. And people really like to intertwine. It's but everybody was, which just isn't true that everybody was Christian. There were plenty of secularists in that day. This book I'm reading right now called Empire of Liberty dates from, I believe, 1783. Shit, I don't know, 1780s or late 70s to 1815. And in that time period, there was a lot of growth of secular ideas, and people who were prominently secular. So it's disingenuous to paint this entire country or the people, it's the same people who say America's a Christian nation. I remember one time, this is a funny story. I was in history class, and I had this teacher, and he was talking about how America was a Christian nation. And I raised my hand, and I was like, but America is freedom of religion. So how is it then a Christian nation? And, I have heard, articulated, educated answers on this. And, okay, I still disagree, but, okay, that's fair. He didn't even give that. He just said, it just is. Moving on. That's the level of these people operate on, but
itself became immoral, and that was established by Protestant Christians in the UK, who then convinced the UK government for 200 years to go to war on slavery.
And wouldn't you say that this is about the cultural evolution of humans in general, rather than just Christianity?
No, I think it's the flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical texts across
I just don't think that's accurate.
Long spans of time.
I feel like this is just humans editing based on the cultural evolution of
morality. What do you mean
morality.
by just?
Just?
Yeah, just humans.
Well, humans.
Editing.
Well, based on culture and history, right? We get better.
They did do it based on culture and history, but culture and history have their foundations too. So.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about slavery. So many people bolstered it based on
Everyone
the Bible. Based on the Bible. They looked at it and they
true.
Justified it in the United States and the Deep South. They justified slavery
but
based
the main
on the
thrust,
Bible.
the main thrust of Protestant thought in particular was stringently against slavery,
Which,
and it was about the only movement in the history of the human race that had an anti-slavery direction.
Which was driven by humans and their understanding
that's one
of
way
morality.
of looking at it. Well, it depends.
It's the same with women's suffrage. I mean, women's in the patriarchy.
What do you mean it was driven by humans? Humans drove slavery too.
Yes, exactly.
So there's no argument there. If slavery
that
and
doesn't mean there's no argument.
Were both driven by.
If anyone doesn't have the argument, it's him. He's this guy's saying that humans evolved to real, like what I was saying before, to realize hey, slavery's wrong, right? And what he's completely sidestepped. He's claiming that he's the one that doesn't have an argument when he is actually the one that doesn't have an argument. He's making the same argument about Christianity, that even though Christianity was actually the driving force in, like he said, justifying slavery and keeping slavery in, but it was also the thing that, was against it. The problem is, one of these things is interpretive. One of these things isn't. Christianity is interpretive. The Bible's interpretive. People can read the Bible, have XYZ interpretation from it. But humans and evolution and science, there's one singular truth in that. Depending on the scientific method, you have a hypothesis, you test it out, you come to a conclusion. That's one string, that's singular. Christianity doesn't have that. It can go any way you choose, right? You could go down the Christian line to the end to think that you need to sacrifice virgins, right? Like that. There's just no reality in this.
By humans, what does your claim that they were driven by humans have to do with it?
Evolving morality based on the culture that within the society that they live in.
Okay, fine.
So with
I
women's
think that
suffrage
did
as
happen.
well is a very similar topic in the Bible. There are denominations in Christianity, such as Pentecostal movement, which do bolster women to be pastors, right? Which I think that's a great thing to do. But most like to disregard
Where do you
women.
think the idea that human beings were sufficiently equal to all vote and not be slaves came from?
Humans.
Yeah, but so did the idea of slavery.
So did the
that's
idea of God.
Fine, but what's your
Yes.
point? Like, you're not making an argument. You're just saying all thoughts come from humans,
Yes.
regardless of the thoughts.
It's not driven by a higher power. It's driven on our experiences
Define
as
higher.
humans, which is what is best for all people.
Is it driven by conscience?
It could be. Which conscious is also something that has evolved over time, and I think that's
What's
something
the
that does evolve in morality and empathy.
What's the evidence?
I don't understand the point that you're making.
My point is that God influenced slavery. People looked at the Bible and went, "This is moral because God says so." Just like women's suffrage,
There's lots
and
of
just like homosexuality.
all human societies were slave owning, so you
Yes.
can't blame that on the Bible.
if humanity decided,
Oh wait, address that first.
What, about
All
slavery?
human societies were slavers, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
well, you can say it bolstered it.
Well, not if you look at the broad sweep of history, because it was the Protestant Christians
Based
in
on
the
their
UK.
interpretation of the Bible,
It was the Protestant Christians.
which evolves over time.
Yeah. I think he actually did a really good job at the end saying, like, yeah, no, it's not because of it bolsters it. And then, but Jordan Peterson, even though it's like it'll bolster it, it's like, but it did this, but it did that.